Tonight, the history of music played, some say, with a left hand like God. Boogie Woogie.
The late U.B. Blake, ragtime pianist and composer, recalls how in 1896, at the age of 13, he heard the pianist William Turk. He had a left hand like God. He didn't know what key he was playing in, but he played them all. He could play the ragtime stride bass, but it bothered him because his stomach got in the way of his arm. So he used a walking bass instead. We called it 16. They call it Boogie Woogie now.
Hold yourself. Press around. Now that's what I'm talking about.
Hello, our special guest from America, Big Joe Duskin, playing Pinetop's Boogie Woogie. Recorded by Clarence Pinetop Smith in December 1928 in Chicago, it was the first time the word Boogie Woogie had appeared on a record label, and with its distinctive bass figures in the left hand, it pioneered a piano style immediately recognizable and much copied. Pinetop Smith made just 8 sides, for which he was paid a total of $100, and although he died tragically young at the age of 24, the victim of a stray bullet in a barroom melee, he and his peers gave to the world not only a new word, but a musical form from which, with a little cosmetic surgery, many fortunes were made. For Boogie Woogie, during the war years in America, became a national craze, a musical hula hoop of often crassly commercial dimensions. Although much of this music was at best mediocre, in its original piano form it produced 3 giants, the big 3 of boogie, Meade Lux Lewis, Albert Ammons, and Pete Johnson, and Big Joe Duskin is their true heir. In tonight's South Bank show, we offer a popular history of a popular music, a music that had real value, both as a form by itself and as a foundation and energizer of other forms like rhythm and blues and country and western. In the final part of our show, we will be staging our own South Bank boogie session, but as with all surveys, we begin by attempting a definition.
Boogie Woogie. Does it come from the soul, the dark soul of Africa, the Hausa boog, the Mandingo booga, both meaning to beat, as in beating a drum, the West African pidgin bogi, B-O-G-I, simply to dance? Or is it fanciful to imagine that the term has emerged from the Indo-European mishmash of New Orleans, clad in the French letters B-O-U-G-E-R, bouger, to move? Does Boogie Woogie mean to the man in the street, woman in the street, or indeed in this instance on the up platform at Harrow on the Hill station? Boogie Woogie?
Pardon?
What does it mean to you?
It doesn't mean anything, I'm sorry.
Boogie Woogie?
Boogie Woogie? Boogie Woogie?
What does Boogie Woogie mean to you?
Boogie Woogie means a great deal to me. It seems to have been with me all my life.
Melvin said I was going to do this bit of the introduction.
When I was a boy, in the early years of the war, I was living in Harrow district and used to catch the train every day to and from school. And at that time, Boogie Woogie was the music that all of us were listening to and attempting to play. On this station in those days, the London North Eastern Railway trains used to come through a few times a day, and that was the one I always liked to catch. I used to catch the steam, as we called it. The reason why I liked it was basically because the rhythms of the train going over the points just sounded like Boogie Woogie to me. Boogie Woogie and train music always seemed to go together. I remember some of the records that we bought at that time, records like Streamline Train by cripple Clarence Lofton and Honky Tonk Train Blues, which was by Meade Lux Lewis. The honky-tonk trains, they say, were trains that used to run down to New Orleans on the Illinois Central line, where one of the cars was just an empty vehicle in which people could dance, and the only piece of furniture was not seats, but a piano. Boogie Woogie largely started in logging camps in South Texas and Louisiana in the United States. All the workers on those camps were black. They used to work 8 hours shift and 8 hours barrel house. 8 hours singing and playing in the very rough and ready saloons that were set up and owned by the logging companies. These would be just a shed, often with only a piano, maybe a simple bar of a plank over 2 or 3 barrels, and all the workers would be dancing and playing Boogie Woogie. In 1960, I did meet up with Edwin Buster Pickens, one of the very last of the boogie pianists of the Texas tradition. He told me that he would travel from one logging camp to another, riding the blinds, or the blind baggage cars, as they were called, on the freight trains, or hitching a ride from the conductor on the train. Now, the conductors were used to the logging camp pianists clambering aboard, telling them a few stories, jumping off the train, getting into another logging camp, and playing again for 8 hours barrel house. In this way, the music got around all through Texas, and eventually, of course, out of Texas. Now, when this new form of piano music came from Texas, it moved out towards Louisiana. It was brought by people like George Thomas, an early pianist who was already living in New Orleans by about 1910 and writing New Orleans hopscotch blues, which really has some of the characteristics of the music that we came to know as boogie. Now, exactly how this music developed is still quite a problem for historians. I've got with me Francis Wilfred Smith, who's a noted authority on the subject, to discuss this. Francis, how do you think it began?
Well, you were talking about the origins coming from ragtime. I think there's no doubt that it was a development of ragtime. There's an element of white music inevitably in ragtime, and I think it got blacker and blacker as more blacks were able to get their hands on pianos, and I think that there was a need to produce a rhythmic music. And it was George Thomas who made the first recording on which there was a boogie bass was used, a walking bass, and that was The Rocks, which he recorded in 1923.
There were many kinds of left-hand bass figures emerging. They were given different names. There was the Chains, the Rocks, the Fives, which became well known in Memphis. Most of these were 8 beats to the bar, left-hand figures. But it was also possible to play some boogies in 4/4 time, or even in 6/8.
You had pianists who could have a tremendous left hand, and they could give you that beat and still furnish you with the music in the right hand. Today, you always find the bass player and the drummer helping out the piano player. The left hand's a lost art. But here's the way it was yesterday. First, Clarence Williams, simple style.
So the indications are that the music was taking shape in the first decade or so of this century. Now, why it did is a little difficult to ascertain, but we do know that the pianists were sometimes playing in saloons and bars, and very frequently for what were called house rent parties, parties that were put on to pay the rent. You paid maybe 5 cents to go, paid a few cents to the pianist, $1 or $2, and provided a little drink, and he played.
Because many times you played a place where you being the only music had to keep that piano going. So when you got hungry, go ahead and eat. Keep that beat going.
This kind of music came from all over the country. Very, very rapidly it developed regional styles, and we find that the pianists were converging on the north, converging on Chicago. In the early part of the century, a whole new generation of younger pianists was born, people like Sunnyland Slim and Roosevelt Sykes, Little Brother Montgomery, who brought a different kind of emphasis to the music.
Yes, they used the boogie bass figures not as a piano, a special piano party piece. They used it as a dynamic platform over which they sung emotional blues.
Lord, I got no special right. Lord, I got no special right now. It seems like my rider is trying to quit me anyhow.
So boogie was not only a separate music, it was also a part of blues, and it was also a part of vaudeville. And it was this ubiquitousness, the fact that it could fit into jazz and into other kinds of music, that made it universally popular.